Welcome, everyone. Hi, I'm Locke Sue, Associate Professor of Asian American and Ethnic Studies at UC Berkeley, and also the chair of the new Asian American Research Center, otherwise known as ARC. On behalf of the center, I am so honored to be one of the co-sponsors for this symposium that honors Michael Omi on the occasion of his retirement. Many other units on campus are co-sponsoring this event as well, and they are places where Michael Omi has played a leadership role for many years. They include the Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies program, the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues, the Othering and Belonging Institute, the Thelton Henderson Center for Social Justice, the Center for Race and Gender, and of course, Ethnic Studies, Michael Omi's home department for 35 years. I also want to thank Deborah Lustig, as well as Gabriella Mackey, for playing really critical roles in making sure that this symposium is running smoothly and handling all the necessities and the necessary logistical aspects to make this possible. So thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Gabriella. Before we begin, I just want to remind everyone to please go ahead and silence your cell phones so that we don't get any unintended interruptions in this symposium. It is being recorded and it will be available for viewing afterwards. I want to start by acknowledging that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chancellor Ohlone people. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with the university's values and community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and our commitment to hold the university accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. This is our first in-person event of the year for this academic year, and we wanted to make sure that we extend a really warm welcome for everyone back, and this is a great kickoff event for ethnic studies and all the other events. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Juana María Rodríguez. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Juana María Rodríguez, who is professor and chair of ethnic studies at Yale. She's currently on sabbatical in Berlin, Germany, and she was kind enough to zoom in for this special occasion. So virtually, and so I present to you Juana María Rodríguez.
Thank you so much, Juana. And welcome to everyone here to the second panel celebrating the life and legacy of Michael Omi. As Locke perhaps mentioned, I'm currently on sabbatical in Germany, where it's getting kind of late, but I really just couldn't possibly miss out on this wonderful opportunity, really to celebrate the life, the genius, and the ongoing impact, the monumental impact of Michael Omi's contributions. I feel sort of special because I've had the pleasure of knowing Michael as a scholar, as a professor, and as a colleague. Like most of you, I first encountered Michael through the groundbreaking text, Omi and Winnett's Racial Formation in the United States, which really is, I think, remains the foundational text of our discipline, a book that has been cited over close to 20,000 times. I think if you took all of the citations of our entire department, perhaps our entire division, they wouldn't add up to the influence and the impact of that book. It's a text that continues to be cited, taught, referenced, and applauded for its visionary analysis of race as an interlocking system and its keen unpacking of the perverse logics of US racism. Keith Feldman and I, in fact, taught it this summer in our introduction to ethnic studies. Coming to Berkeley as a graduate student, I remember feeling so intimidated, right? I was sitting in rooms with the people whose books I had read. But Michael always made me feel like I belonged. Even as a graduate student, he took my ideas seriously, and that made me take them seriously. He made me a better student and a better scholar and a better teacher. I always wanted to kind of live up to his expectations, and we'll be hearing from other students of his, and I know that that's a feeling that's really shared. One of the things that I think is so transformative, as you know, he's so generous in his mentorship, in his scholarship, and just how he engaged us as students, as colleagues. You just get the sense of deep respect and just this banter. Being in conversation with Michael Omi is always a kind of special thrill. You always learn something, you always walk away feeling enriched. Since joining the department, I've also had the singular pleasure of having Michael as a colleague. When I first became chair, I asked Michael to be my vice chair. And like so many things, he agreed, because Michael is just the consummate citizen, always willing to sort of lend a hand, step up to whatever the challenge is, and contribute to the shared project of building a department that for 50 years has worked to continually define and redefine the promise and the potential of ethnic studies. Michael's scholarship and his many contributions to our department really exemplifies the value of ethnic studies scholarship that attends to both individual ethnic groups, and his work on Asian American studies, his most recent work on Japanese Americans, but also, and really thinking about the kind of unique histories and challenges that individual groups face, but also thinking about the interconnectedness of different groups within the larger landscape of the United States. And both of these ways of approaching ethnic studies have really been central to understanding systems of racialized domination and power that surround us. And also, like Lisa Lowe mentioned, so necessary in transforming those systems. His insistence on exploring these racial dynamics and the impact and the ways they impact every aspect of our lives is vital for understanding everything from like the US Census, and his work on that is really kind of public scholarship, to immigration law, to ongoing debates around affirmative action. Moreover, his work helps us understand the urgency in working in community to generate solidarity and cooperation over and against interethnic racial antagonism and competition. His work on our campus has highlighted the importance of race and racism and the systems that perpetuate it for generations to come. He has been part of so many dynamic initiatives that have shaped the face of this campus through his work with the Haas Institute for Othering and Belonging, the Study for Societal Issues, the Institute for Governmental Studies, the Berkeley Center for Right-Wing Studies, and most recently his leadership in helping to launch the Asian American Research Center. As you know, Professor Duster and Rios and Loy have all made exceedingly clear, his insights are more important today than ever, and that work remains undone. Michael, you have left an indelible imprint on our department, on our field, changing the very way we think and talk about race. And you have also earned a lasting place in our hearts. I do affect studies, so I'm just going to say it very plainly. You are loved, you are cherished, and thank you so much for all you do and all you are. And I know that even in retirement, I will continue to count on you for your wisdom, your brilliance, your friendship for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Juana, and I hope you will get some rest soon. Thank you so much for your wonderful comments. Michael, during your career thus far here in Berkeley, and it's not over yet, you have touched many lives, including Michael, and made enormous contributions to our understanding of race, to ethnic studies as a field, to all the disciplinary work that deals and grapples with questions of race and social inequalities. I cannot remember how many times I have read Racial Formation. I first came upon it as an undergraduate student when I was here as an undergraduate. But it really wasn't until when I taught for the graduate program here in ES 200 that I really fully come to appreciate the capaciousness, the thoughtfulness, the real transformative aspects of racial formation as a theory and as a way of showing us a form of practice, a legal practice. There's been 3 editions of the book. I think we'll be hearing this over and over again. Of racial formation, beginning with the original publication of 1986, and another edition, a second edition, and of course the most current edition in 2014. And it remains as relevant and important today as it was when it was first published. 30 years ago, 35 years ago rather, Michael and Howard Minot powerfully argued for us that race is central to the formation of U.S. society. They showed us that racial formation is first and foremost a process, and as such, it is unstable, it is dynamic, and it is ever evolving. It is a field of ongoing struggle in which we all take part in. In illustrating this, the book calls upon us to consider our own roles, our own responsibilities, our own social positioning in this ongoing historical process of struggle and racial formation. This panel today focuses on racial formation, the key theoretical intervention that Michael and Howard Minot developed together. And by the way, Howard will be speaking later on this afternoon, so we were expecting him to zoom in a little bit. In this panel, 4 scholars will share the reflections on Michael's research and its implications. Please do save your questions and comments until the end of the panel. Before I introduce our first speaker, I would be remiss if I did not thank Michael for being one of the most thoughtful, supportive, and delightful colleagues I have ever had, and continue to have, of course. It is such an honor and privilege to have worked with you and worked closely with you on a number of projects in the department, the program, and especially the formation of the Asian American Research Center. We owe you a huge debt of gratitude for your leadership as the founding director of the AARC. You took on this responsibility during a time that was one of the most challenging years of not just a decade, but of the century, I would say. And you sailed us through with enormous grace and effort. And I thank you sincerely and from the bottom of my heart for everything that you have done for ARC, for ads, and for ethnic studies. I've learned from you over the years. I have gained from your wisdom. I have laughed with you, and I have really been graced with this opportunity to have gotten to know you over the years. So thank you so much. Our first speaker today. It's a pleasure for me to introduce, we're going to hold off on the Zoom, so let me go ahead and introduce Tomás Almaguer. Tomás Almaguer is Professor Emeritus of Latino Studies at San Francisco State University and also a UC Berkeley alum. Welcome, Professor Almaguer.
Thank you. Can you hear me with this?
Yep.
Okay. Listen, I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here to help reflect and celebrate Michael's retirement and his many contributions. Michael and I actually go back a little further than just 1986 and the publication of Racial Formation. We actually were both on campus in 1971. I know this is homecoming week, and it really is for me, because I actually stepped foot on this campus 50 years ago. And one of the very first people that I met, got to know through a dear colleague in sociology, Jerry Takahashi, was Michael Homey. And Michael and I are contemporaries. We're brothers. I'm older, heavier. We go back a long way. And so I want to say and acknowledge, the origins of our getting to know one another. We were actually part of a period of time here at Cal in the early 70s where a critical mass of graduate students were being recruited and brought into campus for the very first time in large numbers. And nowhere was that more apparent than in the sociology department here at Cal. We sometimes had 10, even upwards of 20 people, Chicano graduate students in that program, as I recall. And part of what was important and where Michael's work and ours were so connected and overlapping was our common interest in political economy, our common interest in social justice, our common interest in trying to make much better sense of the nature of race relations in this country at that point 50 years ago. And Troy Duster spoke to that point very, very eloquently earlier today. Period of intense political and intellectual foment. Part of what helped us survive and flourish during that period was actually us drawing on one another. And the graduate students and some of the few faculty that were on campus at that time, the Chicano faculty, really got together and crystallized as a collective. We did study groups outside of classes. We met in one another's homes. We actually formed an organization, the Chicano Political Economy Collective, that was devoted to studying the Chicano experience, historically, contemporarily, cultural studies approaches, variety of approaches, all with an eye towards getting a better understanding of the nature of the historical experiences from each one of us sprung. We were blessed at that particular moment because there were a few people on campus who were able to provide us with the support, the mentorship, the guidance, the goodwill, the generosity that allowed us to achieve our goals. And chief among them, at least in Michael and I, our meeting, was one man in particular. That was Ron Takaki. Ron Takaki is the founder of ethnic studies on this campus, as far as I'm concerned. And Ron Takaki was the critical person who certainly shaped my life and academic career doing comparative ethnic studies work. Ron was, well, I don't mean this lightly, but Ron was Yoda. Wise he was. Wise he was. And he guided us. He put up with our impatience, he put up with our snarliness, he put up with our bad behavior, and Ron was the founding rock and that really helped crystallize a lot of the students of color on this campus who were graduate school at that particular time. We were blessed in sociology by having other people who were really quite influential. If Ron was Yoda, Troy Duster was Obi-Wan. It was such a joy and such a delight to see Troy earlier today, and he looks so good, it's so vibrant, it's so just an amazing person. And he was actually part of a group of people who became affectionately known as the Gang of Four: Troy Duster, Bob Launer, David Matza, Bill Kornhauser. And I hope to see him here. There was also a younger associate professor, assistant professor at the time that I was there, who really was kind of our Luke Skywalker, and that was Michael Burroboy. He was really quite a remarkable person. The generosity of the faculty and their guidance that they provided us was really profound. Troy Duster, in particular. Troy Duster, that man has done so much for Chicanos and for students of color on this campus. But he actually opened the doors at ISSC, invited us in, we were amazed, offered us seed monies to start a working paper series, and we did that with great gusto. Much to Troy's genius is that he knew that if he invested in us, that we would pay back, and we did. Oh my God. And a number of really very interesting and I think timely works appeared as a result of that working paper series. Some of my colleagues are here. David Montejanos, Anglos and Mexicans in Texas was spawned from that group. Felipes, expressing New Mexico, and Politica was part of that. María Barrera's Race of Class in the Southwest, my own work, was part of that. And Michael's work was the one that really helped crystallize and galvanize the variety of approaches that we're taking to looking at the Chicano experience, and racial formations was what really crystallized and brought that together, certainly in my own work. Racial Fault Lines owes everything to Michael's and Howie's work. It was a work that was a comparative study of race relations here in California, but the basic point of departure was problematizing race. Race is a social historical concept, and racial formation in California was what I was most interested in. Michael's work shaped our work. We would like to think and hope we had maybe some influence on his work, but Michael was the central kind of crystallizing figure during that particular period. Michael's been sung praises by every speaker, and I want to extend that just one step further. Everyone has acknowledged the power of racial formation, and there are some unacknowledged things that Michael has done that I want to bring to your attention. Troy Duster alluded to this earlier. Michael's work not only has had tremendous impact in the academy, but continues to reverberate across the country. And that whole discussion and debate that's ongoing that Troy brilliantly alluded to earlier, critical race theory, if you really go back, with all due respect to Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, Derek Bell, powerful understanding of the systemic nature of racism that they put forward. But if you do the genealogy and go back, it really always comes back to Michael and Howard. And so what I want to say is that, Michael, critical race theory, you are the father. Why Fox News hasn't come after you? I just really don't know.
They're not well read.
Let me just close here. I don't want to belabor this. Michael is retiring. I really hope people at Cal give him a break and let him go. Let him go. I keep thinking of that movie, Get Out. Michael, it's time to go. And I was hoping Carol Chris was going to be here in person because I wanted to suggest to her, you can't replace Michael with one person. You need to cluster higher to replace Michael. And that's what we need to do justice. But also, I want to hope that they do that because I want Michael to reinvent himself and morph into another life form. He confided that when he was younger, he played in a band. He did soul music, rock, a little bit of country, and I know he's got a ukulele. And I know that he's going to be the next Don Ho. And so I'm hoping that, the next time I come to Berkeley, and I don't come to this side of the bay very often, I'm going to come to Freight and Salvage, and Mike Foley and the ukulele formation band is going to be playing. And so, Michael, I want to wish you well, and I want to wish you a very hasty exit from Berkeley as soon as
Thank you so much for that, Professor Almaguer. It is true, I think there's so many layers to Michael, and I think getting to know him is like peeling an onion, and so you get to know him in different aspects, and we're just sharing throughout the day, and I think that by the end of the day, we may have some surprising performances that I think you all will be anxiously waiting for. But let me go ahead and introduce Gary Okihiro, our next speaker. Gary is a visiting professor at this moment of American Studies at Yale University. I know that he and Michael have been friends also for a very, very long time. And welcome, Gary, to this panel.
Thank you very much. I am reminded on this sobering occasion. Kampai. Oh, I forgot. Of Mark Antony's words in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, as refitted by me. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to praise Michael Olmi, not to bury him. Of course, the distinction between those endings, retirement and death, is, in my opinion, more a matter of degree than kind. I would like to begin with two observations. First, from Howie, who noted 6 years ago that the assimilation of racial formation theory across the disciplines was, in his words, frightening, because it has become a standard, normalized, assumed. The second is from Michael at that same forum, that a central intention of theirs, the co-authors of Racial Formation, was to conceptualize racial formation as an independent variable, not a dependent one. Now, Howie's comment speaks to the problematic of how an oppositional intervention as conceived becomes absorbed and thereby rendered less resistant. Michael's account points out that racial formation is not only a theory, but also, and importantly, a methodology. Howie's observation offers a deeper analysis than mere amazement and gratification that might accrue from racial formation spread across the disciplines and its enduring quality. There is the trivial deployment of theory as doxographic discourse, in the apt words of Jacques Derrida. By that, Derrida critiqued the empty invocations of theory to reap its blessings. I've heard and read numerous such references to racial formation theory that bear no likeness to the original. They are simply invoked as a foil to stand in for ignorance. In that regard, I direct you to the US white and Christian nationalists and their abuse of what they call critical race theory without an understanding of either critical theory or racial formation theory that are the grounds for critical race theory. Beware of racial formation theory as doxographic discourse. In the theory's disciplinary migrations, as a traveling theory in the Edward Saïdian sense, racial formation can become unmoored. The theory thereby loses its specificity and powers. Some African-American feminist scholars of intersectionality fear that dilution in the theory's popularity. As we know, the theory emerged from organic intellectuals like Francis Beale and the Combahee River Collective, who theorized from their lives the major systems of oppression, that is race, gender, sexuality, and class, are interlocking. The context of Beale's insight were her experiences as set against Black patriarchy, white feminism, and first world imperialism in Africa and Asia. Critical race scholar Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality describes the particular manner in which Black women were oppressed and exploited in US legal discourse as neither Black men nor white women. Those generative contexts of place and time are essential for understanding the theory and its travels. The context for racial formation theory, Michael and Howie tell us, were the fields, sociology, fixation over ethnicity, or the cult of ethnicity, and their work with community activists and organic intellectuals who were informed by Marxism. Both audiences, Michael and Howie's intended readers, understood race as an aberration or as superstructure. Their insistence thus of race as a central, irreducible organizing principle of social relations at the individual and societal levels is in opposition to those prevailing views of race, including in sociology at the time, the declining significance of race thesis. Those audiences and contexts, like those of intersectionality, provide a richer apprehension of the work. Now, Michael and I have had numerous discussions over the prevalence and persistence of race within the US, mainly because I resist the idea of a single axis of struggle and of ethnic studies constitutive subject matter derived from European imperial discourses and practices of taxonomy and race. Like many of my generation, I began as a cultural nationalist, and with it, the primacy and hierarchies of race, gender, sexuality, ability, class, and nation that enable the nation form. Thereby, we were complicit with the powers that oppress and exploit to rule. Still, like Michael and Howie, I remain impressed by the centrality and longevity of race in the US, together with its ability to organize mass movements of resistance. Teaching in Japan, I quickly learned how racial formation theory can fare badly in travel. My students readily understood sexism, but racism failed to register with their experiences. After much thought, I'm a slow learner, I now realize that race is foundational to and indispensable for settler colonies and nation states because of demography, land, and labor. Unlike the European nation states that created them, settler colonies began as small companies of colonizers amidst overwhelming numbers of indigenous peoples. They took possession of land from those native peoples, and they expropriated surplus product from migrant labor, enslaved, indentured, and free. Race figured prominently in all of those processes of nation making. The histories of the US and South Africa clearly illustrate those features of settler colonies and nation states. It is instructive to remember that the alarm over a coming race war was first sounded from settler nation states along the empire's peripheries. From Australia, the writer and politician Charles Pearson predicted the decline and demise of white supremacy by Black and yellow races or peoples whom we looked down upon as servile and thought of as bound always to minister to our needs. From the US, Lothrop Stoddard warned darkly of the rising tide of color, of yellows, browns, blacks, and reds, the majority of the world's peoples that threatened to swamp the dominant white man. Imperialism and its landings, colonies, were the staging grounds for those fears, even as imperialism invented the white race in its wars of conquest over non-white others. Recall German Kaiser Wilhelm II's Yellow Peril that urged competing European nations to unite to defend their holiest possession, civilization, and Christianity. Today, white and Christian nationalists blame migrant workers from North Africa and West Asia, whose labor made France, for polluting the nation, replacing them, and menacing them with extinction. Like Pearson and Stoddard of the prior century, contemporary writer Renaud Camus, Le Grand Replacement, 2011, blamed the mass migration of Muslims from Africa and Asia for undermining French culture and civilization. Camus cited as his inspiration Jean Raspail's novel Les Camps des Saints, 1973, which depicted a tidal wave of third world peoples, mainly from India and China, with loathsome diseases and filthy morals, overrun the white world through sheer numbers and interracial breeding. White and Christian nationalists in the US draw their replacement theory from those deep archives. Finally, and as Michael observed, racial formation is a theory and method. More needs to be considered in this important regard. I told Michael, and now you, Howie, how I consider brilliant, a term I rarely use, your choice of formation to describe racializations. I like its solidity and fluidity, its structure or form in motion, information, brilliant. For me, the other amazing aspect of your racial formation is its joint authorship. Not two discrete parts written by two persons, but a single narrative as told by two authors. My first such attempt ended with my co-author threatening to sue me. Despite my vows since then, never to undertake that again, I did, to co-edit a book. That ended with me never again speaking with my co-editor. So from my wretched experiences, I applaud you both for truly co-authoring a remarkable contribution, all that can be expected and more of a life's work. I know you both struggled over the text, agreed and disagreed, argued, and perhaps at times quibbled. But in the end, you produced a collective work, an exemplar of convergence and solidarity. Many of us spoke of revolutionary socialism and its ideals of equality and collectivity. Few of us actually practiced and realized those ends. So I celebrate you, Michael and Howie, for your great achievement. And you, Michael, my dear friend and comrade, on the occasion of your alleged retirement. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gary, for those wonderful remarks and very honest and truthful ones as well. I just want to go ahead and introduce our third speaker today, Nadia Kim, Professor of Sociology and Asian American Studies at Loyola Marymount University. Welcome, Professor Kim.
I'm going to try this contraption. Sorry if I look like I'm about to give you heart surgery or remote your house. I find that when I wear those masks, I'm sucking in, and it's just, anyways, this is the new normal. I have about 10 minutes, right? Yeah? Okay. So I'm so honored to be here today, and thanks to everyone who organized. I realized in writing up my remarks, I wanted to take stock of this moment that never in a million years did I think, as a graduate student, reading this incredible book that seared across my brain, Racial Formation in the United States, that I would be 25 years later speaking at the retirement of this one Michael Elmer. So I'm so Definitely honored and life comes full circle, but definitely didn't have that on my 1997 bingo card. I'll tell you. It mattered to me a lot as an Asian American student at the University of Michigan that this book I was reading on race and the premier text was written also by a fellow Asian American, and that had to do with not just living in a country in which the experiences of race and racism related to Asian Americans was often erased or disappeared or underappreciated, but also that translated into the text. Reading Michael Olney and Winan's book as a graduate student at Michigan also meant a lot because at that time the curriculum wasn't really addressing race and racism as it related to Asian America or Asia. Accepted from that is Professor Tomás Almaguer, so I'm giving you a shout out. So one of the reasons that racial formation was so compelling had to do with the fact that it addressed kind of everything, like it had it all, right? Especially in consideration of the prior theories that had been critiqued. So for example, it addressed discourse and category systems. Right, the social constructedness of race, as many of the scholars today have discussed. And it addressed this discourse in relation to a racial state. And so the racial state was both material and cultural, okay? And it prioritized the mutual constitution of top-down systemic racism, but also, and this is really important, socio-political resistance movements. And I do think that has been one of its signal contributions. There have been multiple versions, right, which I think is also a testament to the importance of thinking and rethinking and incorporating critique. So I am just as compelled by the 1986 version as I am by 1994, and loved the discussion in the 2014 version of neoliberalism relying on race. Okay, neoliberalism pivoting on race and racism. For the 1986 version, who doesn't love Antonio Gramsci, right? Definitely love Gramsci. And finally, as a scholar who often thinks and writes interdisciplinarily, I truly appreciated that Olney and Juana moved beyond sociology's treatment at the time of race as a variable, okay, or as race as additive, or race as declining in significance, okay? And it's not to take away from those works, but sociology really transformed because of racial formation theory. And that is also due to Michael and Howie taking seriously ethnic studies, okay, critical social knowledge, right, and bringing in race as not additive, but as a fundamental axis organizing society, okay. But at the same time addressing that when race is a fundamental axis organizing society, we have to take into account the way in which ideas, discourse, language, right, culture is interrelated with material reality. Okay? So one of the ways in which I was inspired as a graduate student and thereafter was that at Michigan, I really wanted to understand the 1992 LA unrest outside of the prevailing kind of mass media narrative, right? And outside of racial theories that were mostly designed around the white over black experience, but now we have the first multiracial uprising in American history, right, in 1992. And when I read Racial Formation, I realized that it could apply not just to the Korean immigrant American case in LA in the 90s, but it could also apply to US imperialism in South Korea, okay? Which, I had not seen people talk about or address enough, especially because Korean and Asian Americans were pretty much erased from discourse and analysis around even the 1992 unrest. And so when I thought about it, I thought about, okay, US imperialism is also bringing in US racial discourse and US racial hierarchies into a non-white country like South Korea, right, that at the time is developing, right? This is 1945, the 1940s, when the United States comes in as an imperialist power, okay? And so, in thinking about that, you recognize that the racial state is of obviously primary importance, right? And with imperialism, you don't have it without capitalism, right? So, you bring in the various aspects of the state, and you also bring in various aspects of the racial formation theory, right, through the different editions. What also ends up happening is that you have racialized categories from the United States blending or interrelating with social categories within South Korea. So one of the things that racial formation helped me to see was that social categories in Korea were very centered on ethno-nationalism, right? That Korea is a nation that is an extended family that shares one bloodline, right? So it's this biologized nationalism or ethno-nationalism, right? But that is being integrated with American race categories and orders that positions whites over non-whites, right? And so in the 1940s, when U.S. imperialism, comes into South Korea formally, this is Jim Crow segregated military, right? You're bringing a Jim Crow segregated military where Koreans are witnessing that, whites are subordinating Black Americans within their own institutions, right? At the same time that South Koreans interpret that as, okay, so Black Americans are also coming as agents of the U.S. state, right? Armed agents of the U.S. state under an imperialist form of domination, right? And so it positions South Koreans in a way in which they're both able to kind of see themselves as above, right? Based on their own internal hierarchies of skin color and their fixation on class, but at the same time also see Black America as more powerful and as more advantaged than they are. And the other dimension of this is that South Koreans see their invisibility, right? In the United States, their invisibility, their erasure makes sense because when they see, for example, the way the U.S. handles race relations or their military, Asian Americans are still kind of not there, right? And of course that changes over time, and that's the beauty of racial formation, is that this does evolve and change over time. So the beauty too is that there's resistance, right? So, beyond BTS and marketing kimchi politics throughout the globe that the South Korean state does, as a way to gain that political recognition that they feel that they lack, both in the United States and in the world, there is this, oh, you can't scratch your face with this on. There is this counter-hegemony, right, or these resistance movements that at times ally with the Black American struggle, and that at times also really fight against that racial erasure, okay? And you see that same kind of parallel going on in 1992 after the unrest, when Koreans start mobilizing and organizing against the U.S. state, but basically just letting Koreatown burn to the ground, right? It wasn't important like Beverly Hills or Westwood. So anyways, I say all that to say that Michael inspired not just my book, which in turn inspires and helps your career, and has basically, been an undercurrent in all of my writing, but as a very generous scholar, Michael has also promoted my work, and that is not always a given, okay? There are lots of scholars who may like your work or appreciate it, but they don't necessarily take the time and energy and the extra step to promote it. And and especially as a woman of color, and not necessarily being the face of, academia or intelligentsia, I can't tell you, Michael, how much I appreciate that so much. But the most important thing is that Michael is a very kind person. And in the end, I think there's nothing more important than kindness. So, thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Nadia, for your very insightful discussion of racial formation and its extension into a more global context, transnational context, and its relationship to Asian diasporas and Asian communities. The next speaker, we have our final speaker on this panel. I have the distinct privilege and honor to introduce my own colleague, John A. Powell, who is director of the Othering and Belonging Institute and also the Robert D. Haas Chancellor's Chair in Equity and Inclusion. John?
Hey, Michael. Is Howie here?
No, he's on my,
I have a lot to say, and every time you say it, somebody can say most of it. Chicken and egg. It's interesting just to hear people talk about Michael's work and whatnot. And I think Michael, I think a wonderful friend to think about him. And I'm one of those scholars who can truly say, if you look at my work, Michael is all over it. And in fairness to me, if you look at Michael's work, I mean, Michael's work. I continue to learn from Michael. His work's not done. It's like really, I was talking to someone who's does classical music. He says, I hate doing music. People do it. I said, why? I said, because we argue with them all the time about what they're, they write something and then they try to own it. Like, no, once they write it, it comes wrong to the world. And you interpret it. I said, no, you misunderstand. You misunderstand all of it. It's not quite that explaining. But I want to suggest a couple things. So you heard that Michael was the part of the calculus theory. I went to the second meeting of calculus theory, and somebody would say, he's not the father, he's at least the uncle. We've all learned a lot from Michael. We have a lot to learn. I think we're in a very interesting and difficult position. And I hope in Michael's transition, which I don't call it retirement, I mean, any academic who's at a university knows that a good deal of your time is committee meetings, grading papers, board committee meetings. It's not necessarily delving deeply into big, tricky scholarship issues. Michael's issues are profound. Because they're not obscure. Race to me is like physics. It's like weight. It's like gravity. So, what do I mean by that? If I were to talk to you about, whether there's a multiverse or not, it's physics and multiverse, most of you would be glaze over. Interesting, but really, who gives a shit? How does it affect my daily life? Not at all. When you talk about race, everyone has an opinion. Everyone immediately becomes an expert. You really have people say, I don't have to study race because I live it. But to me, race is like, by some accounts, all of us have to. I think she is being more than that for years. The word is that only 4 people in the world adequately understand gravity. Gravity, even though it's something that none of us think about in terms of our weight, really is incredibly complicated. To me, that's what race is. It's something that we all have opinions about. We've all had experience of being covered, walking into a store, or disappeared because we weren't the right racial category or being looked at. So we all have this experience. But we don't really understand that Michael's done, whether it's the Michael father or cultural story, or the story of Juana Power, is to actually pull it back and say, oh, this concept that we all think about is incredible. What we call a master category. I want to just take a few minutes to say why I think Michael's work is not bad. We're in a research, we're in a tricky place. We're more diverse, we United States and the world, we're becoming aware of this. And we're arguing, on one hand, whether we are racial reckoning or whether we are a new post-racial. We see attacks on things like equity, critical race theory, and we're having people wanting to conduct races. All at the same time. It's like, hey, how do you make sense of this world? People are going essentially. So part of it is that we care about race for the United States. And I think that's not enough for now. And until we have a better understanding, I would say, Michael, and how would you work like that? And I'll give you an example. So a lot of people will say, in terms of dealing with race, they'll say, well, you know what? This black-white binary doesn't really count me. Who are me? I could be Latino, Asian, American, States will say I'm not black, and you don't know. But if you read Michael and Chancellor, what they're telling us that race is not a descriptor of black and white. Race is a master category for understanding not just America, but understanding capitalism, understanding colonialism, understanding civility. That is something different than a description of the people. And it's not simply a description. And in that way, actually, you should be by the time of complexity. I think that's very helpful. And they say race is often used as a descriptor of phenotype, physical characteristic. And then they say, well, sometimes it's not. So they merely suggest something to us, then they take it away. And what they're saying, it's a way of organizing the world. It's a way of seeing, especially in modern Western society. It gives us a concept of real. It gives us a new meaning for Christianity. It gives us an understanding of not just American history, but American structure. And I'll close by saying two things. I'll close by saying things. If that's right, I think it is right. If that's right, we can't understand this culture we're in without understanding the role of race plays. Not race as we know position, not race in terms of just phenotype. And actually, what's next in terms of racial position? So the academy is sometimes could accept that the race is socially determined, but it never argued that it's how. But like how it started was that explain they didn't finish. We're not finished. So I'm talking about the future, saying Michael invited me from the university invited me as well. It was nearly my nearest significant Michael. I said, I want to come. Director of the Haas Institute. You will be the deputy director. That's the deal. It's a package deal. Marketing, cipher, that's not what he is. He said, I'll do it. And I signed the paper and I came. And he went to the director. Once I got there, he says, I'm done. I forgot to say how long he had to stay. I have a demographic, not just conceptual, not just intellectual. Personally, I said Michael's really a great friend, so I love and I learn from. And I don't think that's going to stop. I hope now that he doesn't have to take papers, but community, he can really help us sort of dig deep beyond sort of caricature bits, the surface of racial essentialism and racial nationalism, because we can go to that background. Those are cul-de-sacs that I think you can't really move forward. But we're going to move forward and dig more deeply into microscopes. Michael, use your time wisely. We'll catch movies every now and then.
Thank you so much, John Powell, for your incredible remarks, insightful. And I think it's true, we've always, all of us in this room can say so much about the generosity of Michael for everything that he has done in so many different arenas, in so many ways. Let me ask the speakers to please invite me to sit up front at the table, and we can have a Q&A session. I do want to also acknowledge in the audience various members of people from our department, but also Diane Yamashiro, and who is the life partner of Michael Bowley. I just wanted to say hello and thank you so much. There are also a number, there's Debbie Montejano, and I'm sorry I cannot see people's faces very well because of the mask. But, Julie Citramain from our department, Keith Feldman, of course, our interim chair, Marcia also, is that you? And so many others, so thank you so much. And Stephen Small also, thank you so much. So let me just go ahead and kick off, I guess, the discussion with some of my questions. And one is, I think all of you have brought up this, the current situation today and the continued sort of relevance of racial formation and the centrality of race. I wonder if all of you can speak from your own perspective on how we can address this and what is the work that we can forward with racial formation at this moment.
Really tough question, and I'm really vexed by it because I think there are people certainly much better than I who try to understand the changing nature of kind of racial ideology and racial formation process. But I keep coming back to a really simple point, and that is, we live in a white supremacist world. I think no one really uses that term, and I'm just appalled at the last gasp, grasping for retention of privilege and status by people in this country, and that unabated bashing of people of color, whether it's Latinos or Americans or the privileged Asian American onslaughts that we've experienced here in the Bay Area and throughout the country. And yes, there is absolutely a changing way in which the thinking about race and the way it's projected and given life in this country has changed dramatically in the last 50 years. But what is a constant is the ugly face of white supremacy and how we can really, that's really the problem. That's really what's at stake in all of these political debates and all of these horrific attacks on folks of color. And I'm not sure how we traverse that, how we overcome that. That's the tough one, because even though folks of color are increasingly becoming a larger part of the population in the United States and here in California, the onslaught is unrelenting, and it's, I'm just not in a position to be able to clearly kind of explain why and how that happens, only to know that it's ugly and it is society.
Tomás. Yes, we do live under system of white supremacy. It was in my talk, so thank you. I should have said it earlier. That I think in terms of the resonance of racial formation and what's happening now is that the importance of social movements keeps coming up for me. And just like the theory claims, it doesn't mean that there's going to be fundamental large-scale transformative change, overnight. But I do think the fact that, given what happened with the rise of the Tea Party during and after Obama, and what happened with Black Lives Matter as Civil Rights Movement 2.0, and more progressively so in a lot of cases, and then the rise of social movements against the COVID-19 racism against Asian Americans, and also the white racist nationalism against Latinx, Mexican and other Latinx groups. I do think that is a testament to the way in which race and racial systems are slowly gradually evolving in some way, shape, or form. Does it mean there's no blood? Obviously not. But it does seem that the state and civil society, no matter how maybe cosmetic or superficial it might seem at first, is changing. It is evolving in response to these social movements. And, you know, probably they're not as surprised by African American uprising, since that's been the centerpiece of American history, American politics, American history, but the fact that BLM made sure to go march in Beverly Hills and Westwood and these upscale, predominantly white communities, because past protest movements had always seen them, you know, blocked out of those areas, right? I mean, that is a major sea change, and probably quite surprised to see Asian Americans, Palestinian Americans, etc., rising up against white supremacy, right? And so I think racial formations resonance remains, and I think the extensions and expansions on it since the 80s, 90s, and Omi and Juana themselves have brought up neoliberalism, right? We're in a system of runaway neoliberalism, you know, I mean, and people of color, immigrants of color, refugees are the centerpiece of ensuring that we wither the social welfare state, right? Gut the social safety net, that we just let the market dictate everything, housing, healthcare, etc., education. So I think in all of these ways, bringing in intersectionality, bringing in capitalism, bringing in imperialism, settler colonialism, as Gary Okihiro brought up, I think, you know, will just make us better able and better equipped to think through these issues, but hopefully prescribe some kind of, you know, on the ground activism, on the ground reality.
I wanted to ask maybe on the question on academic setting. At what point we will be able to change the canon, so we're still not critiquing the canon, but replacing it completely? The canon of Eurocentricity, the continued reproduction of race in the dominant academic settings. It seems to be that we're in one corner trying to do the work on race, racism, and so on, and then the others continue reproduction of the same type of constitutive racism, whether domestically or transnationally, on U.S. imperialism and so on. So, you know, we raised the question about the U.S. failure in Afghanistan. We critiqued Afghanistan's war before it happened. Some of our colleagues on the other side were advocating for the war of Afghanistan, and now they blame us for the fact that it didn't go as well. So how we could get into that curriculum, canon challenge and changing, so the topography we'll work on is completely different.
Your point is that we should continue to critique the academy, right? I mean, the academy is useful, right? We wouldn't be here if it wasn't useful, or if it wasn't an entry point, or, you know, I don't know if this is even on. You know, if we didn't believe in the power of ideas and the power of analysis, but at the same time, as, you know, racial formation and other major paradigms teach us, that we're still operating under a system that's unjust and unequal, and that was built on the backs of marginalized, subordinated people. So, you know, I'm not surprised about academic discourse on Afghanistan. My argument would be we don't have enough academic discourse on Afghanistan and the Middle East and the U.S. War on terror and Islamophobia in general. But, you know, to me, you know, one thing that I have learned, and I've been inspired by Michael, Howie, and all the others, Tomás, is that you have to go with your gut, you know, and you have to say what, based on your own, you know, evidence gathering and your own understanding, you believe to be, you know, true, you know, and I think as long as you can identify what that is, you know, that you keep on trucking, you know, because one of the reasons why I brought up that Michael supporting my work mattered so much is because I also had the other response, right, which is that people didn't like that I was critiquing the sociology of immigration, for example, you know? And I took them to task for assimilation theory and all of that, and, you know, there's a cost to that. right? But the other response could be, oh, okay, she critiqued and expanded on my theory, great, let me share it. You know, that can be another response, right? And I just hope that there's more of that kind of institutionalization in academia, because that's how we understand issues like Afghanistan, right? That's how we understand rather than a closed down understanding.
It's a great question. I want to come back to a couple things. I think that we are not just rehashing things we've already done. Incredible book, Competence, Discontent, Trumpism is Discontent, or even neoliberalism. I think we actually have in a new terrain. Ethnic nationalism is not the same as neoliberalism. The polarization that we're seeing in the world today is not explained. In fact, neoliberalists are freaking out. The whole idea of globalization, which was one of the cornerstones of neoliberalism, is itself being called into question from all different corners. So I think that the world is changing really fast. And I think it's up to us not just to keep up with it, but to actually get ahead of it. And that also goes in terms of the academy. I think there are multiple things happening at once. There's backlashes and there's backlashes. And there's ways in which critiquing, but there's also ways in which imagining something, having a radical imagination to think about, whether it's celebration, whether it's the academy, some of the sticks taken from it, some of that's happening. And so part of what I heard in the question was, how do we move beyond critiquing and think of something different? Unfortunately, that takes time and resources. It takes time to actually think, as we know. It takes time to actually plan something. So where are those resources come from? Most of us are running building posts just to keep up. And so the last thing I'll say is that I think there are all these things on the table. And they continue to be on the table. And I think looking for opportunities. And I think looking for new possibilities. So yes, continue the deep critique, but what are we trying to get to? And it's so interesting. When I grew up, the idea of the attack on knowledge, the attacks on fact, when you think about both climate change, the thing today, some New York Times, or the rights pushing back on climate change, of course, it's all companies. It's not changing, whatever. Maybe it's not in the made. Maybe it's good. And if not, all companies will fix it. So I think we can't expect them to go quietly in. They're going to fight back. Or play the point. You have to be ready for that. You're going to have to fight back constantly reaching for that next thing. So I don't know. We don't know if we're going to win. We don't ask our turnout. But I think the question is we all take is that we have to create space from those new possibilities. But we also have to think about the resources that are necessary to sustain that.
Let me just have a thought here. That's a really good question. And again, I don't have a real good sense of how that worldview that's dominant now is going to undermine and transform in maybe 5 to 8 years. But one thing that I will say, though, that I tried to be polite earlier, is, this campus is one of the greatest institutions in the world. And yet, it has continued to underserve so many populations. And I was heartened to hear recently that Latino Studies is having a cluster hire on this campus. That's incredible. That's incredible. And I know a little bit about the fights and what it took to do that. But you need to have a critical mass. If a place like Cal is increasingly, every year, more and more populated by students of color, particularly Latinos, and there's a must of being a Spanish institution, you need to have Latino faculty. You need to have Asian American Studies faculty. You need to have Native faculty. And when I said jokingly about replacing Michael with 3 people at a cluster hire, I meant that. I meant that. We need more people, to be part of that battle, to undermine dominant ideology and to press forward with a different kind of way of thinking about the world and our place in it. And so, even simple, small things like that are maybe one of the places we need to put some attention to.
Thank you for that.
that. I think you're absolutely right. We need more hires, more bodies, more employees. Potentially as a whole, this comes from ways.
You know, just one thing, right? So, I just said a talk for something on campus, I can't remember what. But the question was, first of all, I was on a webinar, I was president of the Foundation, and the president made a statement. She said, to fall in love is easy, to stay in love is hard. And the reason I love that is for many reasons. But one is that we bring students here, we bring faculty here, and that's not easy, but it's the easier part of the work. But then we don't keep them. We don't do the work of making them feel like they belong. We don't do the work of, and so I think it's not enough to get them here. That's great, right? But we know a lot of faculty not only leave, they leave bitter. They leave rushed. They leave with their spirits, deflated. So, I mean, literally, we at the Institute, we have some capacity to help the faculty. And frankly, there's certain departments like, no, we're not going to even help put someone there because it would be soul crushing. So we have to do more than just get them here. We have to make sure they can thrive, especially if they're doing critical work that's outside of the orthodox of the canon. Otherwise, it's not a good thing.
In some ways, the demographic changes that's happening in California, in the U.S., prompts us this new question of when, the majority of the population will belong to white. And here we have this incredible opportunity, right? So what do we need to do in order to seize this moment, to transform a society into one that is more just and more equitable for all? Do you have any insights into that? Like what needs to be done? The coalition building that's necessary, the work, the preparation for the continued work of struggling for that.
There are many ideas. So first of all, the numbers are not unimportant, but as our friend María Pastor always reminds us, demographics is not destiny. In the 1970s, 80s, like many of you, I worked on entire pie chart in South Africa, where blacks were 89% of the population, and whites were 11. It was just numbers. Blacks should have been in a different position in South Africa for decades before Nelson Mandela got up. California has been a majority non-white state for decades. But if you look at the legislature, if you look at the seats of power, if you look at corporations, yes, there are more Asians, including on Facebook, but it hasn't reflected California. It hasn't reflected the largest single population, as you know, are Latinos, Latinx. So the numbers are important, but numbers don't automatically translate into influence of people. So we have to get more screen on that. The second thing is, I think we have to actually address this issue, both of white supremacy, but also white people. We can't be what we're saying to, which will continue to be plurality. And some people argue that if Latinx decide to identify as whites, and accept it as whites, then whites will actually be the American majority for decades. So there's some complexity in there, because racial formation is not static. It's constantly going back and forth. And part of it is to imagine a world where there's no racial dominance, not just in terms of number, but in terms of power. And in that formation, there's a place for all of us. And so we haven't done that. I mean, we still have a binary, the ironies and losers. And I can tell you that white liberals will certainly will fight you if we have a future where they don't have to wall. I would fight you if there's a future where blacks don't have to wall. So we have to sort of think about this in different ways. The numbers help, but they don't do all the work for us.
Locke, thank you for that question. I do think one possibility or one opportunity for hope is that with this sort of the Gen Z, the millennials, really, I mean, they're really politically progressive, a lot of them, right? being the #1 supporters of Bernie Sanders and ALC, and they're very prominent in these historic BLM protests for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, etc. And so I think being able to build off of this momentum and effectuate change, it would be wonderful if there could be, as you mentioned, coalition building across these movements, so we don't see, stop, like Black Lives Matter is separate from the struggle for Palestine, from the struggle for Stop Asian Hate, etc. So, and these immigration refugee bans, etc. So, Muslim bans. So, if there's some way that we could, I don't know if it'd be united under the banner of, anti-white supremacy. I don't know what that would be, but, you're not going to know unless you actually have these movements interfacing and working with one another. And in my own emphasis on U.S. empire and the transnational global linkages, like, for example, one of the things that we don't know about South Korea, because, all the shimmery, glittery cosmopolitanism of Seoul and, movies like Parasite, it kind of just sort of covers that up, but anti-U.S. organizing in Korea has never been stronger, and some people might expect that not to be the case at all now that it's the 11th largest economy in the world and is dominating the soft power dynamics of the world, but U.S. imperialism, whether it's tank deaths of little girls walking to school, or it's the U.S. demanding to build a military interception system in a small farming village, it's causing major mass movements that extend South Korea's very long and storied legacy of social movement activity, which most people don't know about. And, when I think about this anti-U.S. imperialist, resistance in Korea, and how it would be so fruitful if we could link it up to, anti-racist movements here. If there was a way, even if they didn't necessarily work closely together, but it's all part of the same, sort of critique and challenge to U.S. state power, U.S. corporatist state power, right? So, I don't know, kind of piggybacking off of what John said, I think we have to envision all the possibilities, right? Because otherwise, we're going to be stuck.
Yeah.
Do we have time for questions?
Perhaps we can hear both questions and see if we can answer that.
Okay.
Let's hear Stephen. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for a very stimulating panel. I'd like to develop some of the issues I think implied by Professor Kim and by our friend and colleague here, Hatem Bazian. We haven't really spoken about the international impact of Michael's work, and there has been an international impact. I know that people, I'm from England, and I know that Michael and how we have been involved in discussions with people like Gilroy and Hazel Carby and John Solomos and our old friend and adversary Robert Miles, we love and tackle. So I just want to make that observation that it does have that dimension, not only transnationally, but internationally. I asked a friend recently in England, a black woman, is it true that when black people in England look abroad, they spend 90% of their time looking at black people in the US? She said, no, it's not true. 99% of their time is what they do. Okay. I know, I came here in '84. I went back to England for 4 or 5 years. I know the book is taught in England. I'll take it upon myself to go explore some courses. And what I think is that increasingly when I go to conferences across Western Europe, there's more and more complaints, particularly by black women, that the black experience in the US, while useful, no longer meets their needs to explain. However, I would suggest that the underlying principles in Michael's work of the hegemony of race in political struggles, the fact that race cannot be reduced to an epiphenomenon, and those principles still exist for analysis of race across many nations in Europe, not just black people, but Muslims, and there are hundreds of thousands of Muslims in Europe who are black. There are many who are not black. And I don't know for sure that Stuart Hall read the book, but I'm pretty sure he did. And if he was alive, I think he would clap and remind us that we need to look at conjunctural factors outside the US. So I just want to suggest that has been a big impact too, and we very much appreciated it. And good luck to Bob Miles.
Kind of piggybacking off of Professor Smalls. That was one of my former professors, actually. And some of the things you all spoke about recently in answering questions from the panel about imagining a different future, right, which is the rhetoric of abolitionism. Speaking of protesters coming out of the streets and entering predominantly white safe spaces, right? And it's this critique of the academy, but while at the same time, the academy works under the umbrella of a white supremacy work culture within its hiring practices, which recreates a white supremacist form of educational, a form of education, while excluding those of us who actually put our feet on the ground and go into communities, right? And actually do the work in the communities. And then, when we try to apply for jobs, you don't have enough peer-reviewed journal publications or this litany of things that tends to keep that person out of the academy while the person in the academy uses that person's work to give legitimacy to themselves as being rooted in the communities while they're in the academy, simultaneously keeping those kind of people out of the academy. So I'm wondering when you're imagining a new future of bringing certain kind of people into the academy, is it one in which where it can be altered as into the ways in which you critique or hire, not critique, but critique the people who's actually applying for the positions? Because if we don't hire different kind of people, the academy is going to replicate the same kind of shit every time. Right? And even within me saying that, I intentionally curse as a part of my pedagogy, right? Because I see it as using colloquialisms as a way in which to break down the staleness of the academy and to create a conversational thing going. But at the same time, if I did that while I'm applying for a job, they might look at me as uncouth. So what do you think we can do with that to really change the academy? Because if the academy, and this is the last thing I'll say, when I was doing my work in African American studies, one of my critiques was we focus on Du Bois, particularly when he was in his 30s in the talented 10th. He died in his damn 90s. But we choose to focus on the talented 10th era Du Bois because it keeps the academy alive. It's not, should we tear down the talented 10th, but who should be included into? And so what are we doing to tear it down? To bring more people in that would reflect Du Bois' ideas of where he admitted he was wrong about the talented 10th and actually fell on saying that it's actually the powers with the masses. So I'm just wondering, what do y'all think can be done with that?
And what is stunning about it is it's one that has been echoed for at least 50 years. You know, and not to disparage it, but to acknowledge that it's an ongoing issue, an ongoing set of concerns. And, you know, and I don't have a good answer for that. It seems that some institutions will, in fact, use a variety of requirements, pedigrees, et cetera, you know, to filter in who comes in and who doesn't come in, et cetera. And there are other institutions where those stakes are not quite as high, and it's a more variety of faculty. But what you have put your finger on is just an ongoing set of issues, and so it's with some, you know, acknowledgement of the importance of your question and also the despair that we're still there, still battling that issue, and I'm glad you embraced it.
So both really good comments and questions, and let me take what's the smallest question comment? Yes, Howard and Michael has influenced thinkers all over the world and continue to do. And I would posit, if I might, that they sort of anticipated your question. Because when they talk about a master category, understanding of society. They say in the United States that master category is race, but they invite us to think about what's the master category in other societies. And they actually use the term of othering, which I'm talking next week to the UN. 17 different countries, most of them Eastern European, where race is not the central way that they think about othering, but they definitely think about othering. And what Michael and Howard does, they talk about the structure of othering and citing Massey and others. So it invites us not to get stuck on a particular expression of othering, but to look at these deeper structures. And that's partially what I meant when I said their work wasn't done. Because if you make it too particular to the United States, they do a great job of looking at social movements in the United States, but their book is about, from my perspective, the deep process of othering the structures that support that. In the United States, that's reflected in terms of race. In India, that's reflected in terms of the caste system. In other places, it may be immigration. And probably because the United States influence, it's a combination. So every country essentially is influenced by the United States. And when we racialize things in the United States, filters to other countries as well. So I think it's there. And I think what's being called for is someone write an editorial, someone write a synopsis to make that point, Professor Small.
Oh, I see, yeah, sure, you can volunteer me. Yeah, I'll follow up, John, thanks, that's good. We can do it together.
To the end of envisioning and having hope, I mean, maybe one possibility is the fact that I do think the Academy is at a point of reckoning, right? With all that's been going on politically, right? And all the different, white supremacist movements and the rise of Trumpism and white racist nationalism and the way it's sort of now all over the globe with all these strongmen, neo-fascist types. I do think the Academy is reckoning with itself, and I know for sociology, one of the things that I'm interested in writing about is drawing off of James McKee's work, who said, sociology failed as a discipline because it was so rooted in these kind of assimilationist, modernizing frameworks that they didn't anticipate the 1960s social revolts, right? The Black civil rights and Black Power movement. And, I think the Academy's, personally, maybe they're not thinking about it as explicitly as this, but I don't think the Academy did a good job of anticipating the rise of Trumpism, right? And the rise of white racist nationalism and Stop Asian Hate and all of that, and the rise of Black Lives Matter, right? And I just think that because of that, we can use that as fodder to realize the value of engaging more with community, and that was the core of ethnic studies when it began, and how I mentioned ethnic studies became, sort of infiltrated into sociology in part through racial formation, but that we have to stop dismissing, as you said, going into communities and being inspired to do research based on, their needs, right, and their questions and the way they view the world. And so, just as a personal example, I had a lot of different choices on what I could do for my second book, but that was one of the reasons why I chose my second book that I did, which was I want to go into the community and understand how these immigrants, undocumented, of color, women are fighting environmental racism, right? And I think now, given the reckoning that the Academy is having, I think it's starting to question whether being so anti being in the community, so anti, being led by, a political impetus or political ideology. I think it's up to us now to kind of, really build off of that. So I do hope that we can envision something to that end.
So, here we are in California, land grant institution, right? There have been, over the last, 30 years, there have been multiple prisons built. I think there have been one campus built. The population in California continues to go up. We have fights between students who could do the work trying to get into UCLA and Berkeley. And so what do? They do left Harvard, so we have, you know, turn Asian students against Black students, against Latino students, saying there's 5 spaces and we all want it. I'm waiting for someone to sue the school, saying in a school, especially a land-grant institution, if the number of qualified students have tripled, why haven't we increased the number of spaces? Why do we keep the number of spaces the same and say for these students to fight over those spaces? And stop building prisons and start building first-class universities.
Does California still spend more in incarceration than does?
Thank you all. Fantastic panel, really thoughtful, provocative discussions around racial formation and its capaciousness, you know, in the domestic sphere of the U.S., but also globally and in so many ways. So there's a lot of work to be done. The work is not finished, but I really want to thank you all, Professor Nadia Kim, Professor Tomás Almaguer, and Professor John Powell for being with us today and leading us in this discussion.